Our next panel features a number of people who are actors along the electric mobility value chain. They're going to discuss how the future is taking shape. Moderating this panel is the Deputy Managing Director of the FuelChoices initiative, Sar Shafir.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon. I'd like to call our panelists to the stage. Eric Fontaine, EV Global Program Director of Renault Group, responsible for electrical vehicle business, including current businesses and new development in countries, technologies, and vehicles. Anja van Neersen, General Manager of Allego, an international charge point operator that develops a charging solution and tailor-made infrastructure for recharging electric vehicles. Dr. Emma Silk, Head of Strategy and Business Development of ESB e-Cars. ESB e-Cars is the business line of the Irish utility ESB that owns and operates the EV charging infrastructure in Ireland and is advancing commercial electromobility opportunities in Ireland and elsewhere. And Dr. Hanno Buch, Head of International Cooperation at the National Organization for Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technology in Germany. But beyond its hydrogen responsibilities, it is also responsible for the electromobility model regions program of the Federal Ministry of Transportation and Digital Infrastructure in Germany, and responsible also for implementation of the EU directive on development of alternative fuels and infrastructure. I'm very happy to have you with us today. So far, there's been quite a lot of discussion around smart mobility solution and designing better efficiency in systems and through that reducing emissions. Now the conceptual parallel of this is of course to do that in the vehicle, and the electric world is strongly connected with the smart mobility world in this sense, that we're trying to design a system as a whole that is more efficient and less pollutant. It's also true from the other side of the vehicle. The scarcity of energy on board the electric vehicle drives us to better design, more efficient design, and better information and communication technologies that will provide the users with optimal solutions. So this comes from two angles, and we've heard over the last 3 years there's been a rapid growth in the number of electric vehicles sold around the world, reaching around 1 million cars up to date. This has been supported by governmental policies, corporate strategies, decrease in battery prices, and new availability of models. But it is still not a sector that stands on its own two economic legs. So what we'd like to do in this panel to discuss how this world is going to advance, what form it will take in terms of technologies, the business models, and the policies that are necessary to drive it forward. Eric, maybe I'll start with a question, a trivial question, trivial, simplistic. Where is the tipping point in terms of the energy density on board the vehicle and the price of the vehicles where demand can be stimulated organically and not through dedicated policies?
Yeah, so I think this question is a question we all have, and I don't know if we have today a very precise answer in terms of numbers. What we know in terms of direction is that we all as an industry need to create a very strong base based first on the customer and on the customer satisfaction. I think that's really, before talking about technical thing, costing, the important thing is that driving an EV today is a great experience, that the satisfaction of the customer is among the highest for the Renault brand as well as for others. But it's a fun experience, it's an easy experience, and that's what first can be the robust base for a growing market. Then our area of working is clearly both on the car side and on the battery side, and we have the two area which will change in the next year. And on the battery, one strong belief we have is that it's not only a race to the highest range as possible. This is of course one way that needs to be tackled because there is some needs on that and some competition on that. But that's not the only way, because we think for a second car, for a commuting car, for a car-sharing car, probably the order of magnitude of range in which we are today, around 150 and 200 kilometers, is plenty enough from a fact base, maybe not for emotional base, but for a fact base. And so we are really investigating the two ways. One, which is to increase the size of the battery on one end. The other one, which is reduce the cost of the battery with existing size. And I think that's a really an interesting thing, because with our diesel or gasoline experience, we keep saying, okay, we want to reach the same level of range. But at the end of the day, it's not what is really rationally needed. That's our first point. And our second area of investigation is, of course, the car itself without the battery, for which we, of course, need to get volume to reach the same level of cost as ICE cars. And this will come, of course, with the growth of volume over years. So from our standpoint, this is really the two directions to work, and to be able at some stage to reduce the public money that is needed at the beginning to grow this business.
Right. Anya, part of the development or transformation of the EV world is the infrastructure. Now, this is kind of a moving target because as vehicle performance advances, the needs are also advancing. But interesting to hear from your point of view, it's some in the heart of this revolution, of this creation of a new field, of how this infrastructure today looks, and what do you think are the major trends that will govern it going forward?
Yeah, it is like a moving target. I think you see that correctly. You see a lot of developments on the car side, and you see a lot of developments on the services side, on the IT services side as well. We saw a lot of that today, earlier this morning. And that's a very interesting future that is being predicted here. And I am a full believer of that, by the way. So that's very interesting. If you look from an infrastructure perspective, it is the most crucial part of that is that you provide an open infrastructure, an open layered infrastructure for basically all the levels of transportation that you will have in your urban environment. And that sounds easy, that sounds quite easy. It's not that easy, as you might understand. So that means that you will have infrastructure where everybody who delivers a service for a car, for a customer, has open, interoperable access to the same level of infrastructure, whether it is for cars, for boats, for buses, whatever might be the invention in the coming years. For us, it means that we are focusing on public infrastructure and semi-public infrastructure in places there where people like to park their cars, or where buses need to stop, or where boats need to anchor, and that we provide a open service to all the service providers, and that can be OEMs, that can be people who provide charge passes, that can be people who deliver energy, that can be anyone who thinks this is an interesting service, and we provide an open access to our infrastructure for that. And that is quite important, because that gives, in the end, the customer or the driver, the e-driver, the full and open choice in how he or she wants to experience mobility, whether that is by car, by train, or whatever, and what car he would like to choose, as long as the infrastructure is completely open, non-discriminatory, and has full open access for anyone who drives a car. That's also our motto from Allego, that we said everybody needs to be able to charge anywhere. So proprietary infrastructure, proprietary systems, that's not something that will have the future in the long run.
Right. Yeah, there is a combination here in this world of smart mobility, the electric mobility, the smart cities, the smart grid. It's all coming together, and it's not just the charger and the electric car in the garage. It's important to understand that there is a whole new world, a smarter world that is combining different sectors together here, and maybe the Irish experience in this, if you can describe how, from the point of view of a utility working to transform a country, perhaps a valuable lesson for this country as well. How is that shaping out?
Yeah, so about 5 years ago, the Irish Electrical Utility ESB, who I work for, took on the initiative as primarily a sustainability kind of a project to roll out the national charging infrastructure in the Republic of Ireland. And essentially that is now complete. And the challenge that exists is probably somewhat similar to the Israeli situation, whereby we have a very low number of EVs on the road. So what was rolled out as a project, an infrastructure project, an extension of what electrical utilities do in our DNA, our core business line is electrical infrastructure, is now we are now asked to look at, well, what's the business here? So what's the longer term play for an electrical utility in this space? How do we commercialize the network that we've rolled out? So currently it's free to use for those 1,200 drivers who exist in Ireland. And then it's about the longer term play around public charging infrastructure, which is what we currently have. The semi-public that Anya spoke about there are the long dwell time locations. What are the needs that exist for EV charging? And then the home space. So we know from international studies that have been done, in particular in the United States, from some of the national laboratories around charging behavior, 80% of charging is expected to be done in the home. So from an electrical utility point of view, that's essentially influencing that percentage breakdown. What's our longer term play in this space? So it may not be a return on the public infrastructure or indeed the semi-public infrastructure. It'll probably be a combination of the semi-public, long dwell time locations, plus charging needs that exist at home. And we know from the last global recession that has taken place, energy demand has decoupled from economic growth. So electrical utilities are scrambling to see where demand can come from in the context of reduced demand, electricity demand, energy demand on account of efficiency measures, which we've heard about here today.
All right, we'll get that to this point perhaps a little bit later. But Hanno, I'd like to ask you now from your perspective, the national program in Germany, you've taken a slightly different path in terms of promoting EV than other countries, some other countries in Europe. How is that, looking in the mirror now, how has that worked out, and what are the plans, or whatever you can elaborate on for the future?
Yeah, like the German approach, or the approach within the NOW, is that we, for the battery electric vehicles, focus more on the regional markets. And as we've heard before, the main transportation happens within 80 kilometers and would be in the urban areas. And this is why we said, okay, we define 7 model regions where we try to gain more experiences in the customer perspective, because this is one of the big black boxes. Like, how is it actually going to be developed? So data are missing. So this is what we try to gain within these 7 model regions, and we do deploy charging infrastructure there together with the community or with the regional governments, and we deploy cars where we can track information from. And this all goes into the next strategy. But this would be the maybe 90% or 80% of the travels. But on the other hand side, we have to think about the long way traveling as well, where we come to the topic of fast charging. And as we heard yesterday from Dr. Steinle, the European Commission just launched the Alternative for Fuels Infrastructure Directive, where each member state has to develop their national strategy frameworks, how to deploy infrastructure for alternative fuels. And these alternative fuels are electricity, hydrogen and CNG, LNG, but this is mainly for heavyweight transport and maritime applications. So for us currently, we try to bring together these 2 worlds. How much normal charging or in half public areas or home recharging do you need in urban areas? And what would be a basic charging grid throughout the country? And then, as you may know, Germany has quite a few neighboring countries. traveling usually don't stop at the borders. So non-discriminatory approach to the charging infrastructure is a very important issue. How to bill throughout Europe. All these things are very important. And one thing I would like to mention here as well, for us, the world doesn't consist only of the battery electric vehicles. This is one part in the whole electrification of the drive systems in order to achieve our climate and energy strategy targets. But hydrogen as well will be a part of it, and we have to be technology neutral there, because we don't know exactly how the customers decide in the future, and strategically it would be too risky to just take one bet on one technology. And I may have to say, due to the Lufthansa strike, I have to leave at 1 o'clock sharp. Okay. So please excuse myself in advance if I just leave the stage earlier than expected. Sorry.
Okay. We heard a lot of discussion around the future of urban transportation here, the smart and IT solution, data solutions that are entering this field. Perhaps in the future we'll see vehicles with much higher utilization, on-demand transportation. So the patterns of consuming transportation, particularly inside the city, are about to change if what we heard in the last 24 hours is correct. And I was wondering, I mean, currently we design infrastructure for what we have today, 150 kilometers, maybe a little bit more. But if things are indeed going to change rapidly in the next 5 to 10 years, how does that affect your thinking of how to deploy the assets today, how to formulate strategy? There are a lot of moving targets here with the future of mobility, with the future of EVs and the performance. So maybe.
We are already looking a few years ahead of time, of course, because the investments that you need to make in a European infrastructure, and we are not looking only at the Netherlands or at Germany, but we are looking at a European scale. That's quite significant, the amount of investment. So what you typically need to do right now is prepare for this multimodal type of infrastructure, which you can use now for the cars, specifically on the fast charging. Because all the slow charging at home, that will absolutely be necessary, but we also need more levels of charging speed, and also fast and even ultra fast charging in certain areas in the city. And then we need to design this infrastructure in a way that we can use it for cars, but also for buses or for other types of vehicles that will be there. And that means that you need to look at urban mobility and city planning in a whole different way as we do right now. Now we are talking about street and parking places, and we have divided the lanes for cars and the lanes for buses, and the spots where cars park and the spots where buses hold. It's all different. But if you look at a multimodal layer within an urban mobility concept, you will immediately change your city planning. And you will have other spaces, you will have less cars in the city. And if you imagine a future where you might do a lot of traveling with a light rail or an electric bus or an electric train that stopped at a certain place, and your electric vehicle is there and it brings you home with your groceries, and you unpack at your home and you ask your car to go back to his parking spot on its own, starts docking in and starts charging, then you will have a whole different layout in your city. You will have certain places where the vehicles can charge in different speeds as they need it, and it's not for us to decide, it's just for us to make sure that our infrastructure is ready to go. It's up to the OEMs and to the bus builders to come up with the right solution, and we just need to be able to have the things charged. But the amount of free space that you will create in your city, because not all the cars need to be parked in front of your house, the buses can have a different routing. That's a tremendous, and in my eyes, a very bright future that we are creating then. So for us, it's the only task now is to be aware of the future developments and make sure that we develop infrastructure that also can be used in 10 years' time or maybe even 15 years' time. And that's quite exciting. Yeah.
And just on that, in order to do that, and exactly as Anya described, coordination, collaboration is key. So what we're seeing here is the merger of the transport sector with the energy sector, and in many different countries also the environmental ministries. So, government ministries have a tendency to work in silos. So what's absolutely key here is having a multidisciplinary task force or entity put in place to oversee the coordinated delivery of multi-fuel strategies, be it infrastructure and the delivery and implementation of them. A good example of that is in the United Kingdom. There's the Office of Low Emission Vehicles, whereby they're bringing together the energy sector, the OEMs, the infrastructure rollout. And I'm happy to be able to say that in Ireland, our government has recently appointed a task force to basically replicate and oversee the delivery of something similar. But it's long overdue, so perhaps there's some lessons learned in terms of fast-tracking the Israeli situation here from what's been learned maybe the hard way or the long way elsewhere in Europe.
Yeah, if I just can comment on that, I think this is a very important point you have brought up. If I take a look to Germany, the battery electric vehicle technology and fuel cell technology suddenly interlinks energy sectors which haven't been linked before. And right now the technology is available to link them, and what we are facing now is that the regulative environment has to catch up with this technology development. So I think in the future, or in the very near future, we have to manage how to interconnect the electricity regulations to the transportation regulations, but as well to other regulations for the heating sector, house energy sector, because for us it's more the overall picture of an integrated energy system, which doesn't mean only electricity, it means transportation, heat, mainly these two, and how to interlink them. And transportation obviously is one of the main sectors there which influence it, especially if you take a look to energy securities and oil dependency. But interlinking these regulative islands currently will facilitate the deployment of this technology drastically.
If I may add to that, what we are looking at now is the creation of a total new market, which has not been there before. And sometimes people ask us, how do you position yourself? And then our answer is typically, since we are now implementing infrastructure in the Netherlands in about 140 municipalities, we are doing a lot of corridors in Europe with fast chargers, and we can only do that if we have this very close cooperation with the local grid companies, but also on the other hand with the OEMs, in order to know when what cars are coming to the market, in order to keep in pace with the infrastructure, because we do not want to put a lot of infrastructure when there are no cars. That's not the right thing to do. But also have this very good cooperation with the local municipalities and with the local location owners who provide space to install all this beautiful infrastructure. And then you have the IT services and payment services providers, which we should not forget, because they start to come up with very nice new features, nice developments that has a great influence on the acceptability of electromobility as well. If that is fun, if people are appealed by it, if they have better services than they have right now in their combustion engine car, it all helps in the acceptance of electromobility. So the linking together of electricity grid companies, automotive companies, municipalities, and IT and payment services companies, that creates a complete new market. And none of these four by itself, by their nature, are used to cooperate on an innovative scale. So that's a challenge in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe one word to answer your question in a little bit provocative way, and maybe bring the question in the more shorter term, because of course all the questions you're asking are very relevant, and we know car sharing operations are mainly based on electric, and this is raising a lot of questions. But this is, for us, as a specialist in this room, clearly a question we need to prepare for the future. But the question is that we need, for the customer, for the general public, to move the step one by one. And if we kind of overshoot and try to be already in the futuristic approach and too ambitious on that point, we might either lose everything or take larger time to reach the destination. So our approach is electric vehicle, electromobility in the current use of a car, which is ownership by the customer, etc., plus a few car sharing projects, is a reality today in a lot of countries. And we have to make it scale up first, and then reach the next step of changing the rules of the game and putting new input on it. So that's, it's maybe not the most fancy and exciting speech, but I think this is a reality. If we need first to have a solid base of electromobility users that are convinced for them electromobility should not be a question anymore, and then we can move to the second and third step of the stairs. But yeah, we are now in the present. Electromobility is the present, and let's secure it first before talking about the future.
But let me, Eric, just challenge you a bit, because the problem is that the data and IT world is moving faster than the automotive world. And in 5 years, you need to start preparing now. So the question is, well, what is the next Renault EV? Is it some sort of a new Twizy? Or is it a new version of the Zoe?
Well, but first, we have already 4 cars full EV in our range, and which is probably one of the widest in the world today, covering a lot of needs, both on pleasure for the Twizy, on a commercial van for logistic and delivery, and also on private use and taxi, etc. So we have quite a wide coverage. So our focus, to be very pragmatic today, is to address the key issues or the key questions that are raised by our customer or by the public authorities, which are range and cost. This is our first priority. So I would not say the idea today is to extend the range, but probably to make it better, to make it more fitted to the customer need. And clearly, the doubling of the battery size is something which is in the perspective of the next, before the end of the decade, clearly. And this will be a major step for the customer, as well as reducing the cost so that the competitiveness of the car is more sustainable.
Okay. Anja, you wanted to add something?
In the Netherlands, we have seen a huge growth in electric vehicles, and we see basically the same in Germany going on right now. In the Netherlands, we think we will hit the 75, maybe even 100,000 vehicles by the end of the year. There's a big boost in sales going on. And what we see there is that it becomes normal to choose an electric car as a real alternative for the combustion engine. You ask, what is the tipping point? And if you see in your own neighborhood people driving an electric car, and you see and you hear when you are on this party and you hear people talking about their cars, and that's what people tend to do, and you hear that charging is not a problem anymore, and that you can drive your electric car from Copenhagen to Rome, if you would like to, or from Rome to the Nordic, then it becomes a real alternative. And if then the costs are at a normal level, then it could go a lot faster than we anticipate right now, all of us. Hitting the 100,000 in the Netherlands is some sort of a tipping point. Then there is no turning back anymore. So we really hope that we can establish the same amounts in Germany, also in the same pace, and then from there try to get the rest of Europe more acquainted to electromobility as such. pricing of the car is very, very important because people need to have a realistic choice. And of course, we also tell everybody that if you look at the total cost of ownership of the car, an electric car is already now the better choice. But people do not look at total cost of ownership. People look at what do I pay today and not what will be the total cost in 5 years' time. So that's still the appeal to the car industry. Have reasonable price cars.
And I think, I fully agree on this question of balance between the cost of the car and the cost of ownership. And I think on this point, Renault had in Europe a very unique answer to this question, which is the battery renting. You probably know that in Europe, if you go in any Renault dealership, you cannot buy the battery. You will buy the car without the battery. You might find it strange or frustrating in some cases, but there is 3 reasons for that. The first one, it brings back the customer in a financial scheme that they already know. So basically, instead of paying every month 80 euro for your diesel or your gasoline, you will pay 80 euro for your battery, and then the cost of the car itself, with of course the incentive, is at the same cost as the ICE car. And so it's a way to make this TCO calculation visible and easy for the customer, plus 2 other benefits. One being the question about technical risk, durability question about the battery. We all have difficult experience with our laptop or phone, and we don't want to experience that on a larger and more expensive product of the car. So in this case, all the risk is supported by us who know the battery, and this is the other advantage of the renting. And last point is to be able to manage in a smoother way the evolution of the technology with upgrade when the day comes when we have a larger battery offer. So this is the 3 reasons why we are really convinced that this choice of battery rental is a strong asset on the market, both for us and more for the customer.
And this creates another new market, and it raises a lot of issues on its own. I'd like to ask you maybe about the utility experience. We discussed here yesterday how the OEM world is shifting to services from the traditional car selling model. And the same thing is happening with utilities. And I wonder how is the utility experiences? How does that change the dynamics within the company?
It changes everything. So I recently had to give a presentation to our board on what ESBE cars are doing and why its positioning is particularly relevant to the state of change and play for utilities across Europe. So, people might have heard me say this yesterday, utilities globally are looking at what's happening with disruptive innovation, with disruptive technologies, with distributed generation, and they're all getting extremely very nervous, or should I say, or are already very nervous. So what does utility model 2.0 look like? And the question or the answer is nobody really knows currently. So in looking at what the traditional utility model is, it's to be an asset owner and operator, and that's where we are inherently most comfortable. That's what our DNA is. We own and operate assets with a long rate of return. But moving forward and looking at the electromobility value chain, for us currently in ESB cars, we're the asset owner, operator, but also the customer-facing end of things with apps, website, and connecting to the customer who plugs into our infrastructure. So the shift is on for utilities to move to the services end of things, and this is actually, it's believed that this is where the long-term value and return will be in the utility space. It's around energy services provision to the end user. The prosumer is a word that goes around the utility sphere, around customers who are now just not consumers, they're prosumers. So they could have solar panels on their roof, not very many in Ireland, certainly more here than there, where they're generating their own electricity. They have the ability to sell back into the grid. They have an electric car, so they've a particular demand portfolio, which is particularly attractive to the supply companies. But in addition to that, they can use the battery within their car to embellish their connected home experience. So it's a state of change currently, but it is absolutely moving to the services end, or the services offering, I would suggest.
Okay, maybe one last question. We'll start with the 1 million cars in Germany by 2020. How is that shaping out?
Yeah, it's still challenging for sure. I think currently, if you take into account plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicles, we are roughly 28,000 vehicles. So there's still a way to go. But I think some of the regulative environment came in place. Now we have the battery electric mobility law, which firstly define battery electric mobiles, which offers the communities the opportunity to give special bonus to electric cars with access to restricted areas, with labeling, etc. like this. And as I mentioned, we have the European directive for the infrastructure, but there are other directives such as the Fuel Quality Directive, which defines the greenhouse gas emission reduction for fuels. And there's the first time renewable electricity and renewable electricity-based fuels are included. So there are some things coming together which pave the way for a steeper acceleration of the electric mobility market. And I think on the other hand side, developments, as we've heard now from Renault or from other companies, they do their part. So I still believe in the 1 million target. It's a challenging target, of course, but I think things come together from different angles now, which can create the environment to achieve these targets. And I think I have to leave now to my flight, and I'm sorry.
And I think we're already a little bit behind the formal schedule, so I think it's a good time to conclude this panel. And I think we demonstrated that this is a whole new world that is forming. It's not just about a car with this or that mileage or this or that charger, faster or slower. It's a whole new ecosystem that has to do with the urban mobility, with the way we interact with the grid, with the way we produce energy in general, with smart cities. So this is a whole new sector that is now shaping out, and I think it's an exciting sector, and that will follow in the next few years. So thank you very much. And,